Okay, so hello and good morning, everyone. Our report is all about the Philippine Constitution, where we will discuss its evolution. From the Biak na Bato Republic Constitution in 1897 up to the present Constitution, which is the 1987 Constitution. Taas kayo among report, so we're asking to bear with us. Thank you. Okay, so let's start with Constitution. So what is Constitution? A constitution is defined as the fundamental law of a nation or state. It is the constitution that establishes the character and basic principles of the government. So, ang constitution ay ang saligang batas ng isang bansa. So, very familiar naman tayo dyan, no? So, it is also described as the highest expression of the law. So, what is the purpose of the constitution? Bakit nga ba ginagawa ng mga nasa posisyon ng isang constitution or ng isang batas? So here are the purposes of constitution. The first is, it prescribes the kind of government that will exist in the state. Second, it creates the different departments and specifies their respective function and duties. The third one is, it is the source of the sovereign powers of a government by establishing the fixed, first, or basic principles. The last one is, it promotes public welfare. The Constitution establishes the rights of the people which the government is obligated to protect. So, ang batas ay para sa ikabubuti at ikakaayos ng mga tao sa isang bansa. So, we have also the Constitutional Convention. So what is Constitutional Convention? It is where the Constitution is written, which is a body assembled for the express purpose of framing or writing a constitution, where it revises an existing one or it revises an existing one constitution or proposing an amendments to it. Okay, so we have also plebiscite, where the draft constitution or its amendments or revisions are submitted after writing the constitution. So, it is for ratification in which the people will decide whether it is acceptable to become a law of the land, and then the result is then considered and followed by the government. Let's proceed to the history of the Philippine Constitution. So, there are at least 7 Philippine Constitutions were framed in our history. So, the first is the Biak na Bato Republic Constitution in 1897. Okay, so in 1897, the Philippine Revolution reached a statement when the revolutionary forces of General Emilio Aguinaldo fled to the mountains of Biak na Bato in San Miguel de Mayumo, Bulacan. General Miguel Primo de Rivera, who led the Spanish forces, realized that even though they could crush the rebels in Bulacan, it did not mean the revolution would end, for it was already widespread in other provinces. So in order to consolidate the forces still fighting in other provinces, Aguinaldo met with his leaders to establish a recognized government. A revolutionary government had already been formed in March, with Aguinaldo as president in Tijeros, San Francisco de Malabon, and Cavite. It was this government that was now in Biak na Bato. So Isabelo Artaco and Felix Ferrer was the two Filipinos were tasked to write a constitution. Both decided to adopt the provisions of the constitution framed in Himaguayon, Cuba, and from this, the Constitution of Biak na Bato was formulated. So in November 1, 1897, the Constitution was promulgated by the Philippine Revolutionary Government and became the provisionary constitution of the government during the Revolutionary against Spain. So, in spite of being a copied constitution, the Biak na Bato Constitution had its own unique features. So, here are its features. So, Biak na Bato Constitutions preamble reiterated the objective of the revolution, which was the separation of the Philippines from the Spanish monarchy and the formation into an independent state with its own government. Second is the government that was formed was a Supreme Council composed of a president, vice president, secretary of the interior, a secretary of the foreign relations, a secretary of war, and the secretary of treasury. This council had sweeping powers of government which included the power to issue orders and other laws for the security of the state, to impose and collect taxes, raise an army, to ratify treaties, and to convene an assembly of representatives. The official language was Tagalog, and in the judiciary power was vested in another Supreme Council of Justice. Article 22 and 25 were essentially the Bill of Rights accorded to every Filipino. So, this constitution was to last only for 2 years, during which, at certain periods, it was superseded by laws and decrees made by Aguinaldo.
And now, let's go on to the Malolos Republic Constitution, 1899. In 1898, the defeat of Spain by the United States in Spanish-American War. In 1896, the Filipinos began their task of creating the independent nation. June 12, 1898, the Philippine independence was declared, and 2 weeks later, Aguinaldo ordered the gathering of a Congress in Malolos, Bulacan. On September 15, 1898, the Malolos Congress had its inaugural session at Barasuan Church in Malolos, amidst a large celebration and a coverage by both local and foreign press. The delegates then convened Congress and elected its officers. One of its acts was to ratify independence declaration in Kawit, and Apolinario Mabini, the presidential advisor, originally conceived the Congress to be an advisory body to the president, while Pedro Paterno, who led a group, decided to create a constitution to form a government that would be recognized by foreign powers. October, the discussion for the Constitution began there after the submission of a draft by Felipe Calderon. One of the heated discussion focused on the issue of the union of church and state, where Catholicism would be the state religion. November 29, 1898, the Constitution was approved by the Malolos Congress and forwarded to President Aguinaldo for approval. And finally, January 21, the amendment were made and the document was finally approved by Aguinaldo. Let's proceed and talk about the feature of Malolos Constitution. The first feature is it was based in a democratic traditions in which the government form was popular, representative, and responsible, with the three distinct branches, which is the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. It is called for a presidential form of government, with the president elected for a term of 4 years by a majority of the assembly convened as a constituent assembly. The third one is it is recognized the freedom of religion and the separation of the church and the state. The fourth one, it emphasizes the safeguard based and the basic civil rights of not only Filipino but foreigners too, through the Bill of Rights can be found in Articles 6 to 32. In July 23, 1899, the first Philippine Republic was inaugurated at the Barasuan Church when Emilio Aguinaldo took his oath of office as the first president of the Republic. The Malolos Republic was the first democratic government of the country. It had a form of governance that included the management of social services, education, the creation of an army, monetary system, and diplomatic. In March 1901, President Aguinaldo was captured in Palanan, Isabela. That's why the demise began at the start of Philippine-American War in February 1899 and ceased to exist. July 1901, Americans had firmly established themselves as the new colonizer of the Philippines with a military government, and they formally established the first civil government in the island.
Let's proceed to the 1935 Constitution and the Commonwealth government. So in 1907, Americans ran the government in the Philippines, with the Filipinos given a role in the legislative function when the Philippine Assembly was established in that year. So, nang makapagtayo ng government ang American dito sa Pilipinas, nabigyan ng chance ang mga Pilipino na maglingkod sa ating bansa. So, in the administration of Governor General Francis Burton Harrison in 1913 to 1921, the Philippinization policy of the government was put in place. Filipinos were given a hand in running the country. The majority of the Philippine Commission members and civil servants were replaced by Filipinos. Soon, the colonial administration placed much of the country's governments in the hands of the Filipinos. 1 year later, the Jones Law of 1916, also known as the Philippine Autonomy Act, was passed by the U.S. Congress. So, the Jones Law. What is the Jones Law? It reorganized the government with an American governor general, a cabinet, and an all-Filipino legislature composed of the Senate and the House of Representatives. It provided both the executive and legislative sectors power over domestic affairs. In October 16, 1916, the new Philippine legislature was inaugurated with Sergio Asminia as House of Speaker and Manuel Quezon as Senate President. So despite the American concession of letting the Filipinos run their own government, the prospect of independence was not erased from the minds and hearts of the Filipinos. In 1918 to 1932, there were at least 5 Philippine independence missions to the United States. The efforts paid off with the creation and approval of the Tidings-McDuffie Law by the U.S. Congress. So in March 24, 1934 naman, the Tidings-McDuffie was approved and was known as the Philippine Independence Act. It provided for the drafting and guidelines of a constitution for a 10-year transitional period government before the granting of independence. This was known as the Commonwealth government. Okay, so following the signing of the Tidings-McDuffie Law, the Philippines began to ready itself for its transition from a colonial country to a self-governing nation.
Kalibapi, or Kapisanan ng Paglilingkod sa Bagong Pilipinas, is a Filipino political party that served as the political party during the Japanese occupation, convinced and elected a Philippine Commission for Philippine Independence, or PCPI, to write a new constitution. October 14, 1943, the Second Philippine Republic was inaugurated with C.P. Laurel as president as provided for in the new constitution. Jose P. Laurel is a lawyer for the local Japanese community before World War II. He was able to build strong ties with the Japanese before, during, and after the war. The Japanese occupation and the Second Philippine Republic 1943 Constitution. As the Commonwealth government was interrupted by the Second World War and the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. The Commonwealth under President Manuel Quezon went into exile in the United States. As part of their Greatest East Asia Co-Prosperity Spur program, the Japanese offered to grant the Philippines its independence. And the importance of 1943 Constitution. The 1943 Constitution enumerates the duties and rights of the citizens, requires the government to develop Tagalog as the national language, and stipulates that 1 year after the termination of the Great East Asia War or the World War II, a new constitution shall be formulated and adopted to replace this constitution. The Second Philippine Republic, officially known as the Republic of the Philippines or Tagalog Language Republika ng Pilipinas, or known in the Philippines as Japanese-sponsored Philippine Republic, was a puppet state established on October 14, 1943 during the Japanese occupation. The 1973 Constitutional and the Marcos Dictatorship. On June 1, 1971, a constitutional convention was convened at the Manila Hotel, and its purpose was to write a new constitution that would meet the new challenges confronting the Philippine Republic that developed since it was formed in 1946. And the peace and order situation brought about the first quarter storm deteriorated, with students' riots and other protests rocking the metropolis. September 21, 1972, the convention's activities soon came to a temporary halt when President Marcos declared martial law, and he abolished Congress and reorganized the government. On January 10 to 15, 1972, the plebiscite was held and the Constitution was overwhelmingly approved. In January 17, 1973, President Marcos signed Proclamation number 1102 declaring the 1973 Constitution ratified. Also, legislative power was vested in the Batasang Pambansa, and the Constitution also provided for the establishment of the Civil Service Commission, the Commission on Adult. In 1981, amendments were made to the 1973 Constitution, and the President was restored from a symbolic head of state. And the 1973 Constitution remained in force until the February 22 to 25 It's a People Power Revolution of 1986, which toppled the Marcos administration. It was abolished with the adoption of the 1986 Freedom Constitution by the administration of President Corazon Aquino.
The Freedom Constitution, 1986. March 24, 1986, President Aquino signed Proclamation No. 3, entitled Declaring a National Policy to Implement the Reform Mandated by the People, Protecting Their Basic Rights, Adopting a Provisional Constitution, and Providing for an Orderly Transition to a Government under New Constitution. The Provisional Constitution, later called the Freedom Constitution, was proclaimed setting aside the 1973 Constitution, thereby recognizing the new Aquino administration as a temporary revolutionary government until the framing of a new constitution. The 1987 Constitution. April 23, 1986, President Aquino issued a Proclamation No. 9, constituting Constitutional Commission, or in short, CONCOM, charged with drafting a new constitution not later than September 2, 1986, that is by the virtue of Section 1, Article 5 of the Freedom Constitution. May 26, 1986. President Aquino appointed the 50 CONCOM member representing the various sectors of society, from politics to the arts and religion. October 12, 1986. The CONCOM completed their task and presented the draft constitution to President Aquino on October 15. February 11, 1987. New constitution was proclaimed, ratified, and in effect on that day. President Aquino, government officials, and the military pledged allegiance to the new constitution. The 1987 Constitution consists of 18 articles with a preamble. The complete provisions are as follows. Article 1, National Territory. Article 2, Declaration of Principles and State Policies. Article 3, Bill of Rights. Article 4, Citizenship. Article 5, Suffrage, which is pagboto. Article 6, Legislative Department. Article 7, Executive Department. Article 8, Judicial Department. Article 9, Constitutional Commissions. Article 10, Local Government. Article 11, Accountability of Public Officers. Article 12, National Economy and Patrimony. Article 13, Social Justice and Human Rights. Article 14, Education, Science and Technology, Arts, Cultural and Sports. Article 15, The Family. Article 16, General Provisions. Article 17, Amendments or Revisions. Article 18, the last one, is Transitory Provision.
That would be all. Thanks for listening.